He could feel this malignant power influencing his body, and he was scared to death that it was going to kill him.
It was the morning of the 18th of April, 1991. Major Jackson Beard of the Kings County Police was conducting a welfare check, but he knew something was wrong as soon as he entered the building. The apartment was filled with a darkness that hung thick in the air and clung to the walls and ceilings like a dense fog. Beard called out, but the only thing that broke the stillness were the ethereal tones of soft religious music playing gently from inside. He looked down and saw salt poured in a strange geometric symbol in the porch, but as he walked through the home, he saw there were lines of salt drawn along the base of all the walls, doorways, and piled in the corners of each room. The apartment was littered with crucifixes, burned down candles, and books on the occult, and although there was no sign of an intruder, he sensed the presence of something uninvited. That was when he entered the bathroom and saw it. Kneeling in the bathtub was a man, fully clothed, with his head resting against a wall. He was clearly dead. The coroner would confirm that the man had died of a heart attack. It was as if he was scared to death. The dead man would be identified as 35-year-old Christopher Case. The resulting investigation would reveal that not only had he predicted when he would die, but that a sinister force would be responsible for taking his life. Welcome to Paranormal FM, your home of the strange, unexplained, and all things that go bump in the night. It's another stormy night, so make yourself a drink and snuggle up under a warm blanket as we prepare to explore the strange death of Christopher Case. Christopher was a 35-year-old music executive living in Seattle. He was a fitness enthusiast, described as possessing a highly intelligent and sophisticated mind. But it was these very characteristics that made the nature of his death all the more perplexing. In his final days, he made a series of panicked phone calls to his friends, saying he was being attacked by dark entities that were trying to kill him, and most disturbingly, accurately predicted the exact day his life would end. The nature of his job demanded frequent travel across the country, and it was during a work trip to San Francisco on the 11th of April, 1991, that he had a fateful encounter that would set in motion a series of terrifying events that would culminate in his mysterious death just 1 week later. That evening, Christopher was invited to attend dinner with other music executives, and while his introverted nature felt uncomfortable about attending such functions, he understood the importance of networking within the music industry. When he arrived at the venue that evening, he prepared himself for an evening of small talk, but he was pleasantly surprised to be introduced to a woman who shared his love of ancient music, particularly that of Egypt and the Mediterranean. She was an attractive woman in her 50s, whose dark eyes held an intensity he couldn't help finding beguiling. But as the evening progressed, he found himself feeling uncomfortable around her. While he wanted to talk about music, she seemed to have more romantic interests in mind, and as the drinks flowed, her flirtations became propositions. At the end of the evening, she placed a suggestive hand on his knee and asked him to take her home. Christopher gently removed her hand and politely declined her offer. explaining he had to be up early the next day. The woman's face darkened, and her eyes flashed with anger. Her once attractive features transformed into a hideous scowl of hateful vengeance. She told him she was a witch, and that he would be cursed for humiliating her. Then a sinister smirk spread across her face as she said, "You'll be dead in a week." He returned to Seattle the following day and called his friend Sammy Sauder to tell her about the events of last night. They agreed that the woman's strange reaction vindicated his decision to turn her down, and the two laughed it off. But this would change days later. It was the morning of April the 14th, and Sammy was awoken by the sound of her telephone ringing. When she answered, she was surprised to hear Christopher's panicked voice on the other end, talking about shadows in his room. When she calmed him down, he explained that he'd been kept awake all night by the sound of whispering voices that had no source but followed him throughout the apartment, and shadow people who watched him as he lay in bed. The fear in Christopher's voice was palpable. She'd known Christopher for over 10 years, and in all that time, he'd always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural, so to hear this sudden change scared her. But this would be just the start of a series of unsettling phone calls Christopher would make to Sammy. The following night, the events Christopher was experiencing escalated from noises and disturbing visions to something physical and violent. He awoke in the night to find himself unable to move. The room was pitch black. Yet, despite the darkness, he felt an evil presence moving in the shadows. He sensed it nearing his bed, but he could only lay helplessly as it approached. He tried to scream out, but two strong, invisible hands wrapped themselves around his throat, choking the life out of him. Just as he felt himself losing consciousness, it lifted him off the bed and threw him back down, then disappeared. The next morning, there was blood on his bedsheet and small cuts on his fingers.
I'm in trouble, Sammy. I'm in deep trouble.
He once more called Sammy for help. Sammy was a psychic, and he knew if anyone could give him advice on what to do next, it would be her. She recommended that he go to a local bookstore called Evangel Incorporated, and it was here store owner Rodney Higuchi would first meet a visibly distressed Christopher Case. He found Christopher looking at crucifixes, who then explained he was being tormented by unseen forces summoned by a witch's curse. But now, the attacks were becoming violent.
He came in, asked where the crosses were, then I saw him collect quite a few in his hands. So I asked him what he was going to be using them for, and he mentioned at that time that he was battling some supernatural forces, and he wanted them for protection. He wanted to know if they had been blessed with holy water.
Mr. Higuchi recommended some books on the occult, and a short time later, Christopher left with the books and crucifixes. As soon as he got home, he poured salt along the base of every wall, at the entrance to each room, and in piles in every corner of the apartment. He placed crucifixes along with candles at strategic points throughout, and finished by pouring salt in the shape of a protection symbol in the porch entrance to his home. It had been less than a week since his encounter with the witch in San Francisco, and now he barely recognized himself. He hadn't slept or been to work in days. Enough was enough. And tonight he would confront the dark forces that had been plaguing him. Sammy suddenly awoke with a feeling of dread and immediately thought back to the disturbing conversation she had had with Christopher yesterday. She tried calling him to check he was okay, but he didn't answer. She called him again and again, but still heard nothing. Finally, she asked the local police to do a welfare check, but when the police arrived, the apartment was locked, and there was no sign of Christopher. Later that day, she returned home to a message on her answer phone. When she played it, the initial relief she felt at hearing Christopher's voice was soon replaced with anxiety as she continued to listen to his message. He explained that last night they had almost gotten him, but that he managed to escape to sleep in a hotel that night.
Hi, Sammy. This is Christopher. Well, they just about got me. You know, they are trying to kill me. So whatever it is I do to defend myself doesn't work anymore. Is what it's coming down to. I'm not looking forward to tonight. It's serious. It's very serious. It's my life.
Then he said something that would forever haunt her. He told her in a tone that was eerily relaxed, almost accepting that he would be dead the next day. When Sammy called Christopher and he didn't answer, she immediately called the police. She explained that Christopher expressed a strong fear for his life and that she was worried for his safety. This time, the police found the apartment unlocked and Christopher kneeling in an empty bathtub. It looked like he'd been praying, and he was surrounded by crucifixes and burned out candles. He had died in the night, just as he predicted. Exactly 1 week after the witch's curse. It was found out later he returned to the religious bookstore and even saw a Catholic priest the day before his death, neither of which could help him escape his fate. The official cause of death was myocardial infarction. In some cases, myocardial infarction, if untreated, has been known to cause delusions and hallucinations, and can result in the sudden stopping of the heart. Could it be that the witch's suggestion of a curse created a delusional state brought on by an undiagnosed and underlying heart condition, which resulted in Christopher Case literally scaring himself to death? However, with cases of untreated myocardial infarction, there are typically accompanying symptoms such as fatigue, chest pain, and flu-like symptoms, none of which Christopher complained of in the weeks leading up to his death. It was strange that the front door to Christopher's apartment was unlocked when the police arrived. Christopher was clearly afraid for his life, so it seems odd for him to go to the trouble of purchasing items to protect himself, only to forget to lock the front door. Is it possible that someone visited him the night of his death and slipped him a fatal dose of poison that made his death look like a heart attack, and then exited the way they came in? If someone was somehow slowly poisoning Christopher, this would explain the sudden change in his behavior and rapidly declining health. The police never did a tox screen on Christopher's blood, so it's likely we'll never know. The most compelling evidence for a curse is just how accurately it was prophesied he would die. What are the odds that both he and a complete stranger could have predicted the exact date of his death? Is this one of the only recorded incidents of someone being killed by a witch's curse? Or just a tragic story of a man with an undiagnosed heart condition who scared himself to death? Whatever the truth, may he rest in peace. That's all from Paranormal FM. Thank you very much for sharing your evening with me. Be sure to join me next time for a very special show.